So, but let's start from, because one of the issues raised was around if the MTN met the listing requirements. From where you sit, though, I'd like you to speak to this point.
I can confirm that MTN did meet the listing requirements for the premium board of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. They were granted no waivers and had to go through the rigorous process to qualify for listing on Nigeria's Stock Exchange's premium board. So that's a confirmation right there.
All right then, but other issues still have come around. One has been around the scarcity of MTN shares, on the trading floor, because a lot of Nigerian investors want to get, part of getting on the pie and get some stake in that stock. What would you say? What's leading to this scarcity of the MTN shares?
Okay, so I'll start with an anecdote. Yeah, I've had people call me and offer ridiculous prices for a stake in MTN. And what does that tell us? I think it tells us that Nigerian investors are interested in the capital market, so that's very interesting. The scarcity is a pricing issue. The market is determined by supply and demand. People will offer where they think that pricing is right. People have held MTN stock for quite a long time, and I guess as far as some of those shareholders are concerned, they haven't quite hit the point at which they feel comfortable to sell those shares to meet their own pricing thresholds. It's basically that. All
right, then. I'm looking at the statement from MTN earlier, and I'm trying to get a sense of, get a better understanding of, the shareholding structure and which amount of the stock, the share price is available for Nigerian investors to get in there. I'm looking at the Nigerian investors have about 19.4%
yes.
of the stock. I'm seeing MTN Group has 78.8%,
yes.
and then the other investors have about 1.8%.
Yes.
So for the Nigerian market now, are you saying it's just only the Nigerian investors' percentage that is available?
So all those shares are listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. It's now a question of who's selling. At the moment, we're seeing some trades by some of the larger institutional investors who are satisfying orders from their clients. So there would be some people who have clients on their books who are asking for these shares, and they're able to meet those demands.
Okay. Nice clarification on that one, because then now let's get on the price, because you mentioned it was an issue as well, and that's why we're seeing some scarcity of this stock. I'm trying to get a better understanding of how MTN came about the 19 naira valuation, and let's explore and see what is hindering what is hindering us not getting the true fair value price for MTN.
Okay, so for you to do a listing by introduction, obviously there has to be a valuation, and there are many factors that impact on valuation. In this instance, it was and it is difficult to get a proper valuation of MTN because of the overhang, the $2 billion that's been demanded by the Attorney General. Why can't you get a fair valuation because of that overhang? What will the impact of that overhang be? Will they be liable to pay all of it? Will they be liable to pay some of it? Whatever the outcome is could impact cash flows. Cash flows will impact performance. And how do you price that in? So the difficulty in not being able to determine that fair price then led to an inference price being determined based on the trading in the linked units. You'll recall that MTN shares had been held by way of linked units by a number of investors whose shares are now have not been listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So on the basis of the 180-day volume traded average price for those shares over the 180-day period, 90 naira was inferred as being the fair price based on those trades. So there's a reference price, and there's a reference methodology. So it wasn't just a guess. There's a basis, on which that 90 naira was determined.
So based on the average of 180 days?
180 days for all the trades that had been done in the linked units. Remember that they weren't shares. They were units that were linked to shares of MTN that were held by a vast number of Nigerians.
All right, then let's get into the issue around the free float valuation.
Yes. So free float valuation, there's a free float requirement for companies listed on all segments of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. MTN, is subject to those same rules, to those same constraints, and will meet those requirements.
All right, then on the issue, because I'm seeing that the stock exchange says that at about after the day of listing, yes, it's at about over excess of 90 billion, yes, of the free float requirement. Mm-hmm. All right, then let's get to the issue of the preference shares. Because that's I'd first like to understand a little bit more about the preference shares redemption and how that even came to be in the first place.
Okay, so again, because of the structure of the holding of Nigerian shareholders in MTN, where it talked about the linked units. So the linked units also had preference shares attached to them, and they've now been delinked. So every shareholder who held a linked unit held a linked unit linked to a share, and that linked unit was also linked to a preference share. Those ordinary shares have now been listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and the preference shares are going to be redeemed by the MTN, as MTN has announced already. So having now concluded the listing by introduction, that process will be advanced.
All right, because it's interesting to see how the market digests this information. But then we're seeing that the company came to the market again just after the listing to get 200 billion from 7 banks in Nigeria. I'm trying to understand the MTN's debt strategy and what their play is on Nigeria.
So I would say that the timing of the announcement of the recent facilities for tutors, it can't be that they just started that discussion. That discussion would have been in the works for a number of months, and it just so happens that shortly after the listing was when all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and they were able to conclude their arrangements with their lending banks.
All right, but when you look at the stock, though, we've seen that it's done 10% almost every day since coming there.
Yes.
And I'm trying to see what from where you sit in your estimation, where do you see this bottoming out?
I actually think that we're going to see 10% over the next maybe 10 days, possibly 2 weeks of trading, because it's in demand. And I think, it just speaks to the fact that Investing Nigeria is excited about companies that do well in Nigeria and will look to seek a piece of MTN. I mean, what are the fundamentals that Nigerians are chasing? Mobile telephony, our population, our young people will continue to do business, via mobile phones, using apps, using the internet. The CBN's recently announced payment services. MTN has a super agent license. So Nigerians are seeing all those things and are seeing the possibility and the growth potential for MTN. Who doesn't want a piece of that? Yeah,
because when you look at it, it's talking about the fact that data and the payment service banks issue is going to be one of the
drivers of the business. Absolutely. And CBN is talking about financial inclusion. So if you think about the number of people who are outside the banking sector and who will have access to banking services through the services that MTN will be able to offer in the future, that is also a driver for revenues, and Nigerians are keen into that, and it goes to show that Nigerians are actually quite savvy in terms of picking out a growth story, picking out an opportunity, and will chase that.